Hello and welcome to Gaming the Podcast. My name is John Robertson and I'm joined by Stace Harmon, and this is the final part of our Elden Ring trilogy of podcasts. In this episode, we turn our attention to the discourse that has been raging pretty much since from when Elden Ring came out, which is this the easiest of From Software's Soulsborne games? Now, prevailing opinion is that the game is still hard, but it is less punishing than From Software's other games, which can make the game feel easier overall. So we'll discuss that, we'll discuss what that means, we'll discuss whether we agree with that, and ultimately we'll discuss how the game's difficulty impacts the overall quality and the overall experience. Stace, there are a lot of people out there who believe that the game is easier, and a big part of that comes from the fact that the game punishes you less. So let's talk about that then. What do you take that to mean, and do you agree with that?
Well, so I would simultaneously say that yes, the game is easier than other Souls games, and no, it isn't. It's just made differently and designed differently. It's like comparing apples to oranges to an extent. And I think the fact that there is so much discourse, and the fact that this can't be neatly summed up in a one-line answer, talks to that. Like there is more here than just like. You can compare, is Dark Souls 3 harder than Dark Souls 2? You can compare those things far more readily because there's an understanding. It's a much more level playing field than you can hear and say, is Elden Ring more difficult or not? I would say for sure it is less punishing in the sense that an individual boss fight might not be less punishing. I've died, Radahn, which I'll get onto as like a case study. I died a lot fighting Radahn, and as I've talked about in the previous two episodes, I also died a lot to some random enemy in Stormvale Castle, who will, I think, forever be my nemesis now in Elden Ring, because that was the first time that I'd really banged my head against a brick wall in this game. So on individual level, it's still punishing. It's still, there can still be like a rage quit element. There can still be a bang your head against a brick wall element, but simply there's just a lot of other stuff to do. I think it's important to define that there's one main path that you go on, and if you get stuck, you can go off and do a load of side quests to come back when you're a higher level. It's not there's other stuff to do whilst you're banging your head against a brick wall in the main quest line, because there's multiple ways of progressing even the main quest line. So it's just there's stuff that you're going to fall into. There's stuff that you and I can talk about where, I can say, oh, did you do that boss? Did you get stuck on them? And it's a boss you haven't even seen yet and may not through your entire playthrough. So this isn't just about providing players with a list of stuff to do. This is about a world that has multiple avenues to explore and different quest lines to progress. So I guess that's a somewhat long-winded way of saying that I think that it is more accessible, and by accessible, I think, again, it's important to define what that means here. Accessibility in this sense, for me, is simply just a question of difficulty. It's a question of having other stuff to do when you're not. It's not a question of being able to play the game depending on various challenges if you're visually impaired. It's not accessible. I'm not talking about accessibility in that sense at all. I'm not qualified to talk about that in that sense. So, yes, it's more accessible. But a lot of that for me comes from the fact that it's just designed differently and it's not the same thing. Comparing one to the other is not a level playing field. I agree with most of that. I get of the ones I've faced, I would say that the bosses have been easier, I think, for me than in other games. Since Margit, which, I died on 30 times or whatever, I don't think I've had one that's more than 6 or 7 after that. And most of them have been 3 or 4. Radahn killed me a dozen times at least.
Okay, yeah, so I've already...
More than that.
I've attempted him 3 times and I've not beaten him. So I think... But I don't know if it's the actual bosses that are easier. It's just that you get so many more options for beating them. Now, I haven't used these options because I'm one of the people who will just stubbornly I don't want to call people in to help me. I don't want to respec my character specifically to face up to this boss or whatever. And those things are much easier.
I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't even thought about respecing.
Yeah, well, okay. So I made a little list, right, of ways that I think the game is easier.
So did I. I missed respecing off it. That's interesting.
So I got respecing to make bosses easier. The fact you can call in multiple friends now to help you. You can use torrent to run away from fights whenever you want, and you're invincible while you get on his horse on the horse as well. There's way more areas to grind for to level up. You can use torrent or just use stealth. So stealth is another way it makes it easy. You can hide and allow enemies to pass, which you couldn't do in the previous games. You either had to run away from them and aggro them and kite them, and they'll follow you, or just take them on. The bigger spaces means you can lure out single enemies and fight them more easily without alerting the others. Like in the other Souls games, you can do that as well, but like the spaces that you'd lure them into are smaller, so you're at more risk if the fight didn't go exactly to plan of aggroing the other ones towards you. Stakes of Marika means you don't have to run through boss areas to get to bosses. You just appear at them again. Magic, and I don't play Magic, but I got a friend who plays Magic, and I was watching him play yesterday on SharePlay on PS5. Magic looks so devastating, and you can do so much damage from so far away. Yes, I believe the game is easier, but I don't think that makes the game worse. I'm still enjoying it a lot, and there are actually ways that I think the game is harder as well. So I think the open world, whilst yes, that can make it easier in that there's more to grind and it's easier to stealth and whatever, you can use a horse to run away. The fact that it's open and there's less guidance and more choice does make it harder on like a sort of, it almost feels like stress, I suppose. Like, I'm not sure where to go. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Like, where am I going? And you can go into that and say, well, this is great. I have no idea what I'm going to come across. But there's also that sort of, the other side of that exploration is, oh my God, what am I going to come across? Am I about to die here? I've got all of this stuff on me. I have no idea if I'm just about to trigger a boss or whatever. I mean, normally you know if you're going to trigger a boss because you go through the mist, but not always. Like in the open world, there are just bosses.
You can come across plenty of bosses, yeah. I mean, at night that's happened to me. You can definitely come across bosses just seemingly randomly, when you are, fully, you've got loads of runes on you and you've got virtually hardly, no flasks left. So, yeah, that can definitely happen. So it's interesting to think of it. It's reductive to think of it in just, is the game easier or harder, because it's a yes or no response doesn't really do justice to the game, really. And the question itself is probably a bit narrow. Aside from just saying, are the bosses harder or easier? Then yeah, okay, maybe you can compare that. But again, it's hard to do that because builds feel like they can be much more diverse here. When you come across those bosses is much more diverse. What level you're at when you come across those bosses is much more diverse. How high your weapons are. So and I think this is maybe where people get annoyed at the conversation with easier or more difficult, because someone might say the game's easier and here's evidence of it. I beat Renala in 2 attempts, which is true. I did. And then someone else might be like, that took me 30 attempts. So now you're trying to undermine me by saying it's easier, but it's not, like, because the question around it's much more complex than that. Yeah, and I think From Software has been intelligent enough that they've designed bosses that fit various builds. There is a historically in like strategy games, there's a very simple rock paper scissors, or in the case of something like Fire Emblem, it might be like sword, lance, axe, triangle, where this beats this and is weak to this, etc. You understand the concept of that. And I think From Software has done that to an extent, but on a much wider scale here. There's many more different types of builds. And so a boss that a magic user finds easy to beat, for example, which might be a heavily armoured boss that moves slowly, and it's just like, that's great. You're heavily armoured against physical attacks, but you've got virtually nothing in the way of magic defence, and vice versa. But then that same build that goes up against a primarily magic using boss may find that their magic defence is super high, but if you can get in close to them with your samurai katana build, You just cut them down really easily. So it's and that I feel like that should sort of stand to reason that that's the case. Like we all know that the build thing, the concept of different builds is baked into the game. One of the first decisions you make, if not the first decision you make, is that. And there are, I don't know, what are there, 10? Like 9-10 different classes you can pick, and then that has a potential impact on how you build that out. So yeah, there is no, this isn't difficulty like talking about it in like an Uncharted game or The Last of Us or something like that. This isn't like, oh yeah, that bit on that linear game is where I got stuck. That bit is, by consensus, hard. That bit is easy. This has a much wider ranging set of variables at play than something like Uncharted does. And, again, I would hope that stands to reason. So the conversation about, is it hard, is it easy, it starts as being subjective in the first place, and when you introduce all these variables, it does become reductive. You're right, and I think there's a bigger conversation. How it pertains to, does that make the game better? I mean, there are people that will definitely feel that if it's not super hard, then somehow it's been watered down, or From Software has compromised its creative vision because they've made it, they just want to sell more copies or whatever it is. But I don't agree with that. I think it is very much their vision for this game, whilst I can't pretend to know what it is, from what I see on the screen and what I experience while playing, is a big open world that they haven't created before. And they have here, and I feel that they have very largely fulfilled on what I perceive to be what they were trying to do. And I don't know, there are ways that you can, if difficulty is a thing, and this might draw the ire of people, but if difficulty is a thing for you, if you conflate a difficult game with a good experience, a fun experience, there are plenty of ways to make Elden Ring harder than it needs to be, in the same way that there are plenty of ways, that list that you reeled off, including spirit summons as well, that's one that I use that I know you don't and other people do or don't.
Do have that here, yes. Summons take aggro. I forgot to,
absolutely.
I forgot to say that.
Yeah, and so there are multiple nuanced ways that you can say, well, like everybody has to draw a line on what they're willing to, what aid they're willing to call upon. And so I did things like, I called in phantoms or some, NPCs or real people on a couple of occasions to see how it felt, because like you, I don't typically do that.
There's the summon spells as well, the bell.
Yes. Yeah. So those are the spirit summons for the ones that those are the ones that I do use. So I a couple of times experimented with, well, let's see how it works and how it feels. And I didn't like it because I felt it upset the balance for me. Now, in some ways, and this is where the Radahn fight comes in, there's some stuff I think where it's very cleverly designed, because intrinsically, when you summon people into your world to help you, you can no longer use torrent. And the Radahn fight is a very, very wide open space where having torrent, being able to ride torrent, has a material benefit in order to avoid certain attacks or get out of the way or whatever it is. And so I found that I called a couple of people in on that fight a couple of times, got to, that thing that feels quite common of one more hit and he would have been dead and then I died. And found that actually, having done that once or twice, it wasn't helpful. It was more to my detriment for the way that I needed to approach that boss fight than being a single player. And of course, in that moment, you can call on loads of NPCs. That's kind of part and parcel. That's part of the narrative of that fight, is that you call upon a bunch of NPCs to come and help you.
Didn't mention that there are spoilers at the start.
Oh yeah, there's a few.
There are spoilers.
So there was, and that I found quite a fascinating case study of the notion of difficulty there, and because what I was looking for in that fight is I want a really powerful magic user, because I feel like that would be the solution here. They will take Radahn down, they'll do a lion's share of the damage. And there was a couple of really powerful magic users that came into my world when I summoned them. They got killed pretty quick because they needed to be within a certain distance to Radahn. He moves pretty fast. So anyway, I feel like there's an episode in just kind of dissecting a boss fight like that. But there was a lot of decisions to be made that I had to factor those accessibility issues, those kind of tools into it. And it wasn't just a question of when you summon people into your world, it makes the game easier. because for me, I found that in that instance, it didn't at all. So there is still to loop it back to my point about if you want to make it hard, you can choose different ways of doing that. And you need to, everybody draws a line somewhere. But there's a decision to be made about like, well, I'm not going to do anything that causes the boss to act differently. That might be a sort of a condition you put on it. So things like NPC summons or human summons or the spirit summons, those change the boss's behavior because it draws aggro and, and that, all of that. So you might say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a one-on-one against the boss. But you can take that to a ludicrous degree and say, well, isn't leveling up your character or isn't going like super hard on one stat to have a crazy high damage output, isn't that kind of somehow gaming the system? And it's, that conversation can become reductive as well, but it's like, my point is it's about where you draw your own line for how you make things easier or how do you enjoy the game, I suppose.
Well, I think that gets to the point of what the game actually is. I think these games, thinking about this and looking back over the previous games, I think the games are really about how do you game the system. That's what the games are about. The games are about giving you multiple ways to act however you want to act, and you taking advantage of whatever solution the game offers to use that to your advantage against, say, a boss.
Win.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ways to do that, and I think that goes down to the key of what these games, the difficulty in these games are derived from, which is that every time you fail, you are expected or rewarded for, whether you're expected to or not, but you're rewarded for taking the knowledge of why you failed and using that to your advantage and using that to game against whatever that next boss is given you. And I don't think that's not like, I don't like to describe it as gaming the system, because that seems like a negative. That seems like, like you've cheated, or you've taken advantage of some exploit or something. But that's not what it is. The game is designed for you to recognize why you failed, pick that element of why you failed and remove it completely from your, or do something to cover it up or whatever.
Every time I use my bow, I get, the enemy does a particular attack that means that I get hit, so I just won't use my bow anymore. Yeah. Like there is a strategizing.
Yeah. So I think, the reasons why you've messed it up or you've failed should be pretty obvious to you if you've been paying attention. And like the game will feel harder if you just keep going in and doing the same thing again and again. And you can still win like that because you can just go and grind and then just carry on. And like those, though, when you were dying on, you can get 8 strikes in before you die. Well, now your 8 strikes are enough to kill them. Like that's, you can play like that. That's totally fine. Like that's just sort of banging your head against the wall thing. Like you said before, that's just that. Just keep banging harder and eventually you'll get through rather than looking for the door and going through it.
And if that's the way you want to play, that is, like, you might have beat the tree sentinel at the beginning of the game. I can imagine having a conversation with somebody and them saying, Elden Ring, I don't know what all this thing about Elden Ring being easy is. I can't get past the first boss if they perceive the first boss to be the tree sentinel and they just keep going up against that tree sentinel again and again. And it's the understanding of, okay, there's a different way to play here. But if you want to play like that, have at it.
Yeah.
But, that's up to you.
Yeah, and I think that's where the core of the game is, in that if you compare it to other games, like there are games like Ninja Gaiden or Super Meat Boy or Ghosts and Goblins or Cuphead even, like even Spelunky for me, although Spelunky is probably more similar to this in that you learn how not to fail when you learn how to overcome your inadequacies. But in those, you can't rely on or you can't overcome their difficulty by saying, okay, I'm not going to do that next time. I'm going to do this other thing. Well, you can't. Like, you need to be absolutely brilliant at the thing that they're asking you to do. Like in Super Meat Boy, you have to do those jumps. In Ninja Gaiden, you're going to have to learn how to do these attacks and avoid those attacks because you just can't. There's no other options for you. You have to do that. So those.
That's why I fell off Sekiro, because I just couldn't, for whatever reason, I just couldn't get the hang of the parrying thing. So I enjoyed the game while I played it, but I put it down eventually because I just couldn't do it.
And I think that in those sorts of examples, those games are just genuinely difficult on a set path, and you have to just overcome. How do I, it's like if each boss is a bridge, like, you have to work out how to get across the bridge. You can't go around the bridge. Like, there's just no other way. Like, you just got to go, and that's what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the difficulty in these sorts of games, and I think in From Software's Soulsborne games, Souls games, or everything apart from Sekiro, the difficulty is not about just smashing your head against a wall and saying get better at this one thing. The difficulty is, well, it's up to you how difficult you make it, because we're going to give you 50 other ways to overcome this. So the difficulty becomes a way of you, if you want to use it gaming the system or just call it game mechanics or whatever. The difficulty is a way just to encourage you to experiment and explore the game a bit more, and the different, not like the world, but like the options and the mechanics in the game. So I think that's the real quality of, and that's the interesting thing to talk about around the difficulty in these games, more so than just how hard it is. Now, the caveat to that is I would be lying if I said that since Margit, I have been a little bit surprised / disappointed that I have just sort of slain the bosses fairly easily. And I would like there to be a boss that does take me 30 times to beat. And I haven't, and there might be, and I haven't come across it yet. So while I respect and appreciate and can see and agree that on a design level, the way difficulty is implemented here is more intelligent and more, just gives you more to do, encourages you more to do, makes the world feel bigger, makes it feel grander, makes it feel like more rewarding. I do agree with those people who say the bosses are easier and therefore that's less fun on getting that sense of just overwhelming achievement at the end of just being destroyed by someone so many times over and over again. That hasn't happened as often in this one as like the man-eaters in Demon Souls. They're way harder than anything I've come across in here. Like way harder. And in part that's because you've got less ways in Demon Souls to tackle that. So it's harder, but in a less interesting.
Yeah, it's harder in a much more straightforward way. It is harder, if anything, it's harder in that closer to being Uncharted kind of way, that it's probably, I mean, it's quite easy. We talk about cheesing things, and I saw a thing the other day about, like, in Elden Ring or in Souls games, there's no such thing as cheesing anything. It's like, well, if you free yourself up to think like that, then maybe you don't beat yourself up about, but I just perched up on this ledge and beat this boss and it couldn't get to me. So, okay. So, like, if you want to do that, then do that.
That's using your intelligence. Because I think it would be a mistake to think that From Software, Miyazaki, whoever, think that the boss is only actually beaten. You've justified your victory only by playing and attacking them from this one direction, or doing this one thing. Or if you figured out how to do the arrow thing, well, you're a bad player, you shouldn't have done that, you tricked us as game design. Like, they don't think that at all. They'd be like, well done. Like,
well, that's the thing. And so there's probably two things there for me. One is the conversation around things like this when you and I talk, either on this podcast or outside of it, about where we are in the game. Did you fight this boss? Did you struggle with this one? We don't then progress that conversation to the point of saying, and how did you beat that boss? Oh yeah, I beat that boss first time. All right, and how did you do that? And what method did you use? As if there is, like, here's 3 different ways of doing it, and I picked method B. You did it, however you did it, you overcome that challenge, and that was, easy for you, or it was I banged my head against this brick wall 20 times because I just couldn't work it out. And that's been the thing for me, is that I feel like and then I worked it out. So I worked out what I needed to do to unlock this, and then I found it much easier. And I think we've got footage of the Radam fight on our YouTube video for this podcast episode. That when I eventually beat Radam, it was surprisingly straightforward. And I thought, okay, actually, I've made this. Well, I haven't made this a lot more difficult than I needed to, but in experimenting with multiple different ways, it took me longer to find the answer than just picking, if I'd picked this one to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, you did it easily on the time that you did it, therefore it's easy. But it took me, I had to learn.
Working out.
Yeah, I had to learn for however many attempts, however many hours before doing that. And you'd expect, if you'd taken all of that education on board properly, then you execute it well, then yeah, of course you should beat them fairly easily. That doesn't mean to say that it's easy just because in attempt 20 you beat them easily.
Yeah, and then the other thing around that is so we talk about potentially cheesing bosses or any part of a Souls game, but that works the same on the flip side of that, because you could easily make the case that in creating something that is just really tough, that creating a boss with super high defense to physical and magic attacks that does tremendous amount of damage. Maybe it poisons you at the same time. Maybe it puts down a cloud that is very difficult to escape. And once you're in that environment, you're probably going to get poisoned, which means you're on a death spiral. It's very easy to create a boss like that, to create a difficult boss fight. But I think you could make the case that is just cheesing boss fight design. Like, that's a very easy thing to set up and then say, well, the players are going to have a real tough time with this. But so what? Like, what have you achieved? That isn't good. That isn't enjoyable to me. I mean, maybe people view that as an almost impossible challenge, and they really get off on that. But then I would hope that they understand that they're an outlier. That's fine. You enjoy the game like that. That's cool. But that's not how most people are enjoying this game, and that's not how an artist creates a piece of work to only appeal to, like 10 people. You want your stories to be out there in the world. How much you pander is up to you. If you even use that word is up to you, but you don't want nobody to see your work. So I think that's the thing about cheesiness, and that goes both ways, I think. And I've certainly enjoyed Elden Ring more than any other Souls game. For me, that's to do with the world as a whole. To me, that's part of that, is that feeling of, well, what am I going to do next? What shall I do next? Where shall I go? I'm going to open the map. I'm going to pick a point on the map and I'm going to go there. That looks like an interesting location. I've been playing now for 70 hours. So I can look at the map and, those faint outlines that probably mean there's a ruins there that I've learned. That's not just a random map feature. There is something there to go and see. Or that area looks quite difficult to get to because the elevation is different. It looks like there's only kind of one way up and down there. So that's what I've been enjoying about it a lot. If I were getting stuck, if there was a gatekeeper, I mean, I know Margit for a lot of people was that. If there was a gatekeeper who just was shutting down any further progress in any direction, then I don't think I would enjoy that. I would feel a sense of relief when I overcame that, but I wouldn't say that was an intrinsic part of me enjoying the experience.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that the open world does, and this kind of links to boss fights as well, actually, is that it well, the open world and then the extra mechanics that are available to you in the open world, is it rewards your creativity more than other from software games do, and more than most games do, really in general, in that there are so many ways. Like, for example, what you're saying about the boss fights, like if there was just one way to kill a boss, then that's not creative, is it? The way you're going back to the Ninja Gaiden thing, and look, I love Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden is that Ninja Gaiden 2, I think it was a game where I got all the way to the end. I absolutely blazed it for like 2 weeks or whatever. Got all the way to the last boss. And I can't remember why, but it was Red Rings of Death on my Xbox 360, and the Xbox went away, and then when it came back,
that's a worse enemy.
And then when the Xbox came back, and I put the game back in, it's like, okay, I'm finally going to do this boss. Like I just couldn't play the game. Like, I'd lost every piece of skill. Like I would have had to restart the game. Like I didn't have any other saves from earlier places that I could go back and like pick it up again at a gentler pace. Like, no, you're on the last boss now, and it's like, oh God.
I think I had a similar thing to that with Bayonetta, with that, and I just lost the ability to manage multiple different situations, and I just couldn't play anymore. So, or Bayonetta 2, I think, I can't remember, but there's definitely like a muscle memory or sort of way that your brain is programmed when you start playing certain games that makes it difficult if you then take a break from it.
But with this, and thinking about it as well, any of From Software's games, any of the Soulsborne games, minus Sekiro, I'd feel confident going back into it because there isn't just one way to beat those bosses. So you can relearn it quite quite easily. Well, not easily, but you can have
You
a
can take yourself
creative
somewhere
approach
to do that. Yeah.
You can have a creative approach to tackling it. It wasn't like, okay, I just need to remember and be as good as I was at that exact same thing that I was 2 weeks ago or a month ago or whatever. Because there are so many different things, and it takes a lot of skill to design a boss fight in that way. And like, don't get me wrong, like, Zelda's hit the red bit on the enemy is still a perfectly valid way to design bosses, and you can have some really creative encounters in that. Nier Automata had one good ones of those, but like to be able to design a boss so that it still feels difficult, but it can be defeated in, I don't know, 20 ways or even 10 ways. That's no mean feat. That's really high level of craftsmanship and imagination and like, sort of, and it goes back to what I said before about just having belief in the player that they are going to take the knowledge from every defeat and then use that as currency to then buy their way through the fight as each further attempt they get further and further and further until they eventually defeat it. And I think that's really, again, like that's where these games are. That's where the difficulty rests in these games. And they're easier if you're more creatively thinking. I know I said it's easier now. I've just said they're easier because they're creative. Therefore, I'm saying, look how creative I am. But they're easier. But you know what I mean? They're easier because they give you so many ways to learn and so many ways to then use that education to defeat them. And all the Souls games do that. But there are so many more ways to be creative in this, that it for someone thinking about the entire wealth of their arsenal at their disposal, then there are ways for you to make it easier. And
this is something that goes back to an episode. I think it was not last week's, maybe the week before's, but the notion of the game giving you information. It doesn't necessarily tell you things explicitly, but it gives you the information. The world acts in a certain way. There's a consistency, or at least a hidden outcome or consequence to experimenting in certain areas that then for me gives me the motivation to do that elsewhere. So things like using lightning attacks in water and how that affects its area of effect damage, or things like I think I had one the other day that was a particular type of magic that I used against, I think it was holy magic, that's what it was. It was fighting this thing underground. It looked like some sort of, deathly apparition. I think it imbued that status effect, the death rot thing that it does. And there was well, wait a minute, if that's its attacks and it looks like that, it looks like it's made of darkness, there may be holy attacks, which I don't ever use, but maybe holy attacks, because they're tied to faith often, will be the way to go here. So I crafted a bunch of holy like pots, the consumable pots that you can throw, and lo and behold, they did a disproportionate amount of damage. So the information was there for me. It didn't fit the build that I normally play, and I didn't go and respec in order to make that work, but it was like, there's a lot of stuff here. This isn't necessarily just about, do you engage with a system or not? Do you bother with the consumables or the crafting or not? It's there to potentially provide you solutions to problems if you want to go and look at it, rather than just keep trying to pit that same your one problem solving tool against it again and again and again. And that's a good feeling when you do that, like it's not a, I don't feel like it's being done to be obtuse. It's just, well, the world behaves in a way, and once you kind of know that, you can experiment with it and and feel clever, like that's and I making think players feel clever is a good thing.
And I think when we talk about difficulty, there's often like a macho element to it. So like, I can imagine that there will be some people who would listen to what you just said about using that form of magic against that boss and it being super effective again, essentially, like it's this it's Squirtle fighting Charmander. Like, if Squirtle hits first, he's winning.
Thanks for that insight.
But
I'll remember that.
But there is a kind of macho element, and I think there will be some people that look at what you, or just hear and react to what you've just said in such a way as well. Of course, it's easy if you do that. Like, I made it harder myself by only using the sword or whatever, and that's fine.
And using a blunt club.
Like, you can do that. Like, that's totally fine. And I think I guess what I'm saying is that the difficulty is what you make it and what works for you. And if you're someone that wants to just keep smashing away at the same tactics, well, then that's fine. Oh, and if you're someone that wants to not circumvent, but like use your knowledge or your wisdom, I suppose, to overcome an enemy, well, that's still difficult because you're having to think about how to do that rather than putting your trust in your thought rather than trust in your skill to dodge or block or hit properly.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't mean it's necessarily easier, although I have found it easier. But it just means that the difficulty is resolved in a different way.
Yes. Well, there's two final things for me that I want to cover here, and one of them could be actually a podcast episode all in itself, which is how From Software then uses all of this, uses the challenge as part of this to then reward you. And this is off the back of, again, there's heavy spoilers evidently all throughout this episode, but this is off the back of more recently fighting Margit again in a random place. Like, Margit was dropped in to an area, but not as like a big boss, not as like this is a big cinematic confrontation, there's a cutscene, none of that. He was just on not random, it was planned that he was there, but it felt random. He was on a random battlefield somewhere, and I fought him and I killed him relatively easily, as you would probably expect. I don't imagine he is scaled. And also, in the same kind of area, there's 2 tree sentinels stood, and they won't do it if you don't aggro them. They won't do anything, but you can go and choose to engage 2 tree sentinels simultaneously. And the way that From Software calls back to those bosses that you had a lot of problem with originally, and by way of showing you how much progress you've made and how much better at the game you've become, it uses them again to say this thing that you felt was potentially, for some people, felt almost insurmountable at the beginning. You're now at a stage, not just because your weapons hit harder, but because you faced a lot in the time in between, and you have a much deeper understanding of the game. Yes, your weapons do hit harder, sure, but you have a much deeper understanding of the game, and you can now overcome this challenge
it's like,
relatively easily.
It would be the equivalent of like a boxer who's gone throughout their career and they've risen to the top and they're about to have their first world title fight, and they're starting to tremble a bit, and they're like, oh god, am I really tough enough? Am I strong enough to take on the world title? And so their trainer says, yeah, you are. Like, look how far you've come. And to sparring, they bring in the guy that you beat in the first ever fight, and it was a tough fight. But now you just absolutely ruin them.
So, okay, it's good to have that check-in it's good to be reminded, and I think that's an interesting way of doing that. I think the way that From Software do that is because it speaks to more than just that individual moment. It talks to the entire game. It talks to the fact that there are challenges that might feel insurmountable, but you felt like that in the past, and you might not remember that feeling from 50 hours ago or whatever it might be, but you did feel like that, and that can remind you. And it made me smile, like taking on, and I didn't think much of it. I took on 2 tree sentinels. I think they did kill me a couple of times because I wasn't good enough to beat them. But then I went back, beat them, and I was like, yeah, okay, well. And I banged my head against that wall, multiple times. So I think that the progress.
There's a lot of banging heads against walls. You're supposed to bang swords against shields. You're not supposed to. No, that's why I'm failing, banging my head, using my head. And then the final thing for me is a question for you, and it's about that fact that you touched on earlier about, is it that you have found it easier, and there is a tinge of disappointment in that. I remember last week, I think it was, you said that you'd got to a new area where you were questioning, however briefly, you were questioning your build or the route that you'd taken, because things that you'd been able to do previously were now becoming more challenging. And I'm just wondering how that went, and is this yes, you're finding things easier, but I don't know if it's not giving yourself the credit that you found ways to overcome the problems that you faced, or if that moment in time that you had last week was pretty short-lived and actually was just this one type of enemy. And then how that pertains really to, like, if it is easier, is that going to affect how you feel about playing the game? Would it push you into PvP to seek a new challenge? Would you
could you see yourself falling off it because actually you do need that challenge? Like, how does
I don't think. No, I mean, the challenge side of it is not really what drives me through. No, it is. Of course it is. But it's not. The game feeling overly difficult isn't really what drives me through these games. I mean, certainly for this one, because like you said, like the exploration and all the different little quests and who's coming and going from the round table hold and what items I've got and stuff. Like, there's a lot of intrigue in this, more intrigue on the non-combat side of the game than there is in these other games. So, I mean, I'm still being driven primarily, I think, by just a sense of what's over there in that bit that I haven't unlocked, and what's in that mine, and what what can I upgrade, and whatever, do I need to use this new piece of armor or not, and whatever the case. But yeah, I mean, the difficulty spike that I found, so the game is in general getting harder, right? So like the normal enemies are getting harder. Really it's about the bosses for me. It's that I've not really come across any bosses other than Margit that was just like genuinely I was really struggling on. I'm trying to think of like what the other ones are that I've really not had problems with. Some of the dragons, I guess, can be kind of challenging, largely because they fly up in the air and I can't get them from there. And then when they come down, then have to be really close to them and whatever, and they can just stomp you or hit you a random bit of their body, and you take a bunch of damage and have to back off. But no, just going around in the world has gotten progressively more difficult, and I've kind of been quite stubborn as well in that when I went back to Caelid. When I first sort of entered the open world, I unlocked Caelid but didn't explore it really, and then it was just too hard. And then when I came back to it more recently, it's still hard but doable, So yeah, like the moment, like just wandering around the world is getting harder, and I'm stubborn in that I don't like to. If I feel like I can do this, then I feel like I'm gonna do it now. I'm not gonna like come back later. Whereas early in the game, I didn't feel like I could do that area. I was like, as a level 13 samurai or whatever, going against those big, whatever those like dogs are, like dogs crossed with like T-Rexes, whatever those things are. Like they were just destroying.
And there's often more than one of them. I mean, that's the part. Again, talks to some of the design things. Often more than one enemy, whereas in the early game, in quite a few places, there's just one individual, maybe two enemies roaming around. There you get a collective, and those dogs are.
So I think I'm having like a weird. I suppose in thinking about what I just said, the difficulty for me in the game is wandering around the world. The bosses are easy, like that is. I think genuinely that's true. Actually, when I think about that is I am having more trouble on that side than I am with like individual enemies, big powerful bosses. I can do when it's wandering around, and that might be because of my build. Like I've gone back to two-handing a single sword now, but a different one. Yeah. Than I was using earlier, and I think that whilst I can damage enemies and pick some off with the bow from afar, I think just going into areas where there's 4 or 5 enemies, and I could stealth them and that, but I don't. I just prefer not. I just don't really enjoy that bit of the game that much. But I think, with my builds, tackling 4 or 5 like medium to high difficulty enemies is harder than me just tackling one difficult one.
Yeah, that reminds me, perhaps to end it, that reminds me words of wisdom from Fezzik in The Princess Bride when he's fighting Wesley, and he explains why for him fighting 4 or 5 guys at once is easier. This is the opposite to the situation you're describing, but fighting 4 or 5 guys is easier for him because he has to think in a different way, and there are different things you have to be aware of than when you're only fighting one. And that's his weakness. He struggles with that in fighting Wesley. Wesley finds a way. He cheeses him, if you like, jumps on his back and, chokes him out. But that's I like that parallel. That's Princess Bride has a lot to teach us, I think, about modern game design. So
I'm going to model my next character on. I'm going to do New Game
I'm going to be Wesley.
Yeah.
Dread Pirate Roberts I'm going to be.
All right, on that absolute brilliant cultural link.
Topical.
I think that's a good and necessary place to end. So yeah, get in touch with us. We are on Twitter at Indie by Design, and come discuss whether you think Elden Ring is easier, more difficult. Is it better for being easier? Is it better for being more difficult? How do you perceive the difficulty in the Elden Ring? We'll be interested to hear what you think. Otherwise, this is the end of our Elden Ring trilogy of podcasts. Go back and listen to the other 2 episodes if you haven't. I'm sure at some point in the future we'll do another Elden Ring episode, but probably not next week, because otherwise we become the Elden Ring podcast, which isn't what we are. So yeah, that's all for this episode, and we'll see you again next week.